Ben Shapiro has become a very popular spokesperson for conservatism. He has a lot of confidence and he's a real fast talker, and it's amazing how far those things can take you. Even if you have no idea what you're talking about, having a lot of confidence and being a fast talker can make you very successful in human society. I saw some rhetoric that Ben Shapiro had destroyed atheism, so I decided to check it out. I came across a video where he talks about religion and non belief and some other subjects. And so, is Ben bringing anything new to this debate, or is it the same old insanity? Well, let's take a look.
Now, it's interesting to bring up the religiosity, the conversion to Orthodoxy for your family.
I was sad to hear that his family had converted to Orthodox. To me, that means putting yourself in a bubble. That means putting yourself in an echo chamber. When I think of orthodoxy, I think of children who aren't allowed to learn about evolution or how old the earth really is, and not allowed to have access to the internet or any sources that would be different from this indoctrination that they're getting.
Because I think there's a prevailing ethos that religious people are a little stupider or naive or unthoughtful or intentionally unthoughtful. In my own experience, I find people who are not educated or necessarily intelligent can be quite religious. And I've found that people who are extraordinarily intelligent or educated can be quite religious and often are. And then there's this middle ground of total atheism.
I don't see total atheism being any kind of middle ground. When you talk about people who are religious, they're kind of saying it like it's all the same. Somebody's either religious or they're not religious. But we all know there are many degrees. There are people that are obviously extremists in their religion, and that's never a good thing. And then there's people that are very casual about it. They call themselves a Christian, or they call themselves Jewish, the Jewish religion, not just being Jewish as far as your ethnicity, but they really don't. They're not dogmatic about their religious scripture. They're very liberal, and so that leaves room to keep up with modern science. So there's a big difference. It's not just religious. It's, well, what do you mean when you say you're religious, and do you have these dogmatic, indoctrinated beliefs, or is it more of a liberal interpretation? As far as intelligence, yeah, you can be extremely intelligent or not intelligent either way. But when it comes to keeping up with scientific progress, obviously there's a big difference. Even somebody who's intelligent, if they've been indoctrinated into crazy beliefs like the earth is only 6,000 years old, and this brain damage, this indoctrination, they're not going to change their mind no matter what, then no matter what their IQ is, when they talk about science and they talk about the age of the earth, they're going to completely portray themselves as idiots, because it's not just about IQ, it's about being open to knowledge and being open to progress.
I think that's right. And I think the reason that's right is because a lot of people who are hardcore atheists, I'm not talking about agnostics, because I think the only evidence-based position on God is agnosticism.
Sure,
because there's no other evidence of any, like you can go either way.
In 2008, Richard Dawkins basically did a hit piece on agnosticism in his book, The God Delusion. Basically equated it to being mamby-pamby. And then a comedian, Stephen Colbert, when he said an agnostic is an atheist without balls, that really continued this. If you're agnostic, it means you're weak. And so the term really has become out of favor. When Thomas Huxley created the term agnostic, he described it as you hear Ben Shapiro describing it. You absolutely know. For atheists, he called them Gnostic, meaning knowing anti-theist. There isn't a God. And then the religious people were Gnostic theists. They knew there was a God. That's why he created the term agnostic, without knowledge, which more than anything was anti-dogmatism. Now, people calling themselves atheists, they're just seeing it really as belief, no longer with knowledge. So it doesn't matter if whether you know or not. What do you believe? Do you believe that there's a God? And if you don't believe, then that puts you into that atheist side of the house. At the end where he says, based on the evidence, you can go either way, that's not really being honest. He's basically saying either way, kind of like 50-50. But when you talk about Judaism, you're not just talking about you're not talking about an agnostic definition of God, some kind of higher intelligence that's somehow connected to the universe. You're talking specifically about a God that looks like man, that's jealous, doesn't want us to eat shrimp, and has all these attributes associated with him that are crazy. And to say that's in that 50-50 percentile, when you break it down, there's really no reason to believe in the God that's defined by men in this book that he claims allegiance to.
But as far as kind of hardcore atheists, a lot of atheists who are very hardcore and very vocal about it, they seem to think they're the first people who ever figured out that like a virgin birth is kind of unlikely, or that God speaking from a mountaintop is kind of weird. Like they're the first people this ever occurred to in the history of humanity. Like it's brand new. No one's ever thought of this. Or they'll talk about the problem of theodicy, and they'll sit around going, well, you know, I had a friend who died of cancer when they were young. How could a good God allow this? I mean, I'll bet you no religious thinkers ever talked about that. It's like there's 2,500 years of religious thought on exactly this topic.
It is incredible that people will bring up this question as a trump card.
Right.
They'll say, well, why would a good God let bad things happen? And you think, you're not asking me that. You could Google it, and you would get eternal books about this.
Right, and they may not satisfy you.
Well, I have to agree with Ben Shapiro. If he's running into people that are atheists, that think they are thinking these things up for the first time, then there's a whole lot of research that they should be doing. Now, I find it kind of hard to believe when there's so much material available on the internet, and there's so many YouTube videos, and there's so many people talking about who they're inspired for and kind of the history. My favorite atheist is Robert Green Ingersoll. He served for the Union Army during the Civil War. He's been dead for about 120 years. So certainly there is nothing new about atheism. And when you read the works of Ingersoll, you do see the same arguments that are used today, same arguments that were used by Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, these same realizations. For example, something that's very common is logistics. You're not a particular religion because it's true. You're a particular religion because that's what your parents were, and that's because of where you were born and the time you were born. It was about logistics. That realization goes back centuries. So anybody kind of thinking about that, well, no, that's not you, but you're coming to the same realization that people centuries before came to. And that helps build the case to understand, there's no reason really to believe any of this is true.
But the idea that there's no sort of explanation for that any religious person has ever thought, like, they expect me to convert on the spot. You're right, now I'm an atheist because you dropped that on me. No, I mean, most religious people have doubts.
I think Ben Shapiro needs to understand something. When he says religious people have doubts, he's thinking about the Jewish people, the fellow Jewish religious people that are his family, his friends, the people that he's associating with. Doubt is very big in the Jewish culture, and argumentation is very big in the Jewish culture. And Jews, especially when you look at modern history, have so much progress we've seen by people who were Jewish. So despite these beliefs that I think are absolutely insane, we have Jews that have absolutely caused a lot of progress, a lot of human progress in science and in innovation. I mean, amazing accomplishments by Jewish people that do follow this crazy religion. But don't think that because you have that in your culture, that exists in other cultures. That doubt, that doesn't exist in Christianity. That doubt, that doesn't exist in Islam. You're basically told you better not doubt, because that might get you into hell. So I think he's conflating what he has with what's socially normal, what's customary, and saying, oh, well, all religious people are like that. Well, no, they are not.
Most religious people understand that there's a difference between faith and knowledge. That's why it's called faith. Right? That's why it's called belief. You're a believer, right? You're not a knower, you're a believer. And there's a clip of me saying that I know in God, but I didn't say I know God, right? I said I know in God, because no human being is capable of knowing God.
No human being is capable of knowing God. Well, if you read the Bible and you believe the Bible is a true account of God, well then yes, you do know God. For example, God is jealous. I've mentioned that before. God is jealous. People have attacked me. You don't know what God is. It's like, well, wait a minute. I'm going by the Bible. And then they'll admit, yes, that's there. God's jealous. And then some crazy things like God's jealous for you, like a husband is jealous for his wife, which I won't even get into how insane that is. But you can't say we don't know God and yet say you subscribe to this religious book that you believe is the word of God and has all these attributes and descriptions of God that will allow you to know this God by reading it.
I know the place of humanity in the world because I believe there is a God, but I think that that is a different standard than religious person who never even thinks about whether God exists or what God wants from us. I think that it's written right into the Bible. I mean, I think that the key moment in biblical history, there are a bunch of them that people sort of point out in the Old Testament anyway. The key moment for Christians is very easy, but for Jews, there are a couple.
There's just one. I guess two. There's the birth and the death and resurrection.
Right,
but
exactly.
It's very simple.
It really boils down in the sequel. In the sequel, they really boil it down, but in the original.
If you're Jewish, you do not believe that the New Testament is the sequel. If you believe that's the sequel, then you're Christian.
There are a few different sort of points that people use as inflection points. Sacrifice of Isaac, the Exodus from Egypt. But I think that the real key moment is a quieter moment, because this is the moment when Israel is actually founded, and that is the wrestling match between Jacob and the angel. Right? That's when Jacob's name is switched to Israel. That's the first time that Israel is used in the Bible and that becomes the foundation of all of religion.
Foundation of all of religion. Time out. Okay. Foundation of Western religion. Judaism, Christianity, Islam. It's certainly not the foundation of all religion. It's not the foundation of Hinduism, which actually is much older than Judaism and still practiced today. Certainly not the foundation of Buddhism or Confucianism or countless other religions. So let's get a grip, Ben. Let's understand that the world is much bigger than your book.
And Yisrael literally means struggle with God, right? It says right in the Chumash, it says right there in the Bible that this means, and you struggled with God and overcame. That's what religious people do every day. We struggle with the goodness of God, the presence of God, the immanence of God. We struggle with that all the time. If you're not struggling, you're not thinking about it. And God wants you to struggle with that, because if you're struggling with it, then it means there's a baseline level of belief. You don't struggle with things that you think are imaginary. You don't struggle with Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny.
Once again, he's conflating Jewish culture with all religions. When you look at the Gospel of John, that is not about doubt. That is salt and peppered. Believe, believe, believe. It completely discards the Sermon on the Mount, which actually had ideals of morality that you had to meet in order to get into heaven. And in the Sermon on the Mount, the word belief doesn't exist not even once. But in the Gospel of John, believe, 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 believe. If you want to go to heaven, you will believe. It's heavily indoctrinated. So don't think that your doubt of your culture exists in Christianity. If you go into your typical Christian church and you say, okay, who here doubts that Jesus is their Lord and Savior? You're probably not going to be getting any hands going up in the air.
You struggle with your wife, you struggle with your family, you struggle
Right.
with people that you love, that you have a relationship with.
Exactly.
You struggle with a lot of things. You struggle with how can so many people believe in things that are so completely freaking insane? And how can good people idolize things that are so wicked and evil?
Do you think, because all the time we hear, especially from young conservatives, well, I'm fiscally conservative but socially liberal. Well, I just want to focus on policy that works. And there seems to be a metaphysical ignorance or a neglect of metaphysics.
I agree.
Do you think that there needs to be a metaphysical basis for conservatism?
I think that if you want to think it through for more than 5 minutes, yes. Because I think that you can live in the political world and not really think about the bases of your thought. But, I mean, it's fascinating always when you talk to people who aren't religious or who disparage the Judeo-Christian tradition upon which this entire culture was built.
Mm-hmm.
Judeo-Christian culture on which this entire country was built. That is a lie. Either Ben is saying that out of ignorance, maybe he's just repeating what he's been indoctrinated with. And I'm guessing that's it. I'm guessing he doesn't understand that he's lying. The United States of America was built on the Enlightenment, a philosophical movement. It wasn't built on the Bible. There's no mention of the Bible in the United States Constitution, which begins with "we the people." And compare it to the Bible. Compare the First Amendment, which says you can believe in any God you want, with the Bible, where the first commandment is, you shall believe in no other God than the God of the Bible. And if you don't, then he's going to punish you and your children, your grandchildren, and their grandchildren. That is in complete opposite to what is in the Bible. And let's understand the structure of government based on the Bible. You're looking at the covenant with Abraham, a man claiming that a whole bunch of land belongs to him, never mind everybody else that's already on it. They can be killed because according to this guy, God told him everything belongs to him in exchange for a piece of his foreskin. So he grabs hopefully a piece of obsidian, something really sharp, hopefully not something dull, circumcises himself, has his sons circumcised, has the males in his house circumcised, meaning the male slaves. And imagine the grimacing, the looks of pain as this is happening. And imagine the blood and this pile of foreskins. That is the foundation of government in the Bible. And please point to the United States Constitution. Please let us know where you're seeing that connection.
And they'll use Judeo-Christian terms, right? They'll use Judeo-Christian definitions of good and evil. They'll use
Judeo definitions of good and evil. Is this man so ignorant of history? Is he so ignorant of culture? Judeo-Christian, the Bible did not invent the concepts of good and evil. And quite frankly, when you look at the Bible, what's considered good and evil is completely warped. When you look at the actions of God and when you look at the actions of Satan, to be honest, Satan comes out the better looking guy. It's completely warped. And to be so ignorant of everything outside of the Bible, everything that came before. The ancient Egyptians built the pyramids 1,000 years before the stories of Moses, God's right-hand man, God's moral lawgiver, who after saying, "Thou shalt not kill," slaughtered his own people for worshiping a golden calf, slaughtered the Midianites, women and children, killed babies, cut down pregnant women. He was an absolute psychopath. The concept of good and evil, we're stealing that from the Bible. The Bible doesn't own that. The Bible didn't invent that. The Bible does not have the rights to good and evil. When you look at the ancient philosophers, Socrates didn't have definitions of good and evil. Confucius didn't have definitions of good and evil. Both of them had nothing to do with the Torah, were never exposed. Socrates, his people worshiped Zeus, and the ancient Egyptians before that, Isis and Osiris, and Confucius believed in a spirit world. So absolutely nothing to do with the Bible. It just amazes me that this is really how he thinks, that the concepts of good and evil were invented by the Bible, and the Bible has the patent on these definitions. It is just so unbelievably arrogant. And either it's arrogant or it's an attempt to be a thief. It's an attempt to steal from every culture that came before the people that wrote the Old Testament, to steal from the ancient Egyptians and to steal from the ancient Greeks, ancient Romans, and so many civilizations. I mean, the ignorance in that statement is absolutely astounding.
Judeo-Christian notions of rights that don't exist in the absence of Judeo-Christian culture, right? They don't exist anywhere else on planet Earth for all time.
Right.
If he's talking about the idea that a God has to say what's good and what's not, If he's talking about that, then that's still outside of the Bible, because that's exactly what Islam believes. That's exactly the same concept in the Quran. In Hinduism, you have gods involved with good and evil. You certainly had that with the ancient Greeks and their beliefs that we now call myths, which is just a past religion. Today's religions are future myths. So even if he's defining it in that way, oh, it has to be a man claiming that a god said something was right or said something was wrong for something to really be good or bad. If that's what he means by this bullcrap term, Judeo-Christian values or Judeo-Christian definition, even that exists outside of the Bible and other religions. So why aren't they including these other religions in this description as well? Judeo-Christian, Hindu, Muslim values. There is just such an avalanche of bullcrap going on here.
And the idea that you haven't really thought these things through, it's dangerous. I mean, every political philosophy is based on a certain conception of human nature and humanity's place in the world and human value more than anything else. I mean, the foundational statement for all of Western civilization is the very beginning of Genesis, that God is made in man, that man is made in God's image.
Right.
The foundation of all of Western civilization. Western civilization didn't begin at the writing of the books of Moses. It existed long before them. The ancient Egyptians, their society built the pyramids 1,000 years before. The pyramids that after 4,500 years, people are looking at saying, oh my gosh, look at the craftsmanship. Look at the logistics that must have been involved. Look at the architecture. Imagine doing something that people 4,500 years later would be looking at with such awe. My gosh, look what they accomplished. And what did the ancient Jews do that even comes close to that? And so for the ancient Egyptians, they didn't have concepts or good and evil. They didn't have laws. They didn't have rights or wrong. They didn't figure out not to kill anybody. No, all that stuff started. The entire Western civilization started at the beginning of Genesis. Never mind the ancient Greeks who revered the ancient Egyptians. Egypt is where they went for guidance. It's where they went to get educated. And then obviously with the ancient Greeks, we get the big three, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. We get the first democracy in Athens, and all by people that never even heard of the Torah. They worshiped Zeus and Apollo and their ancient Greek gods. So this really, it looks like an attempt to steal. You want to be a thief. You want to steal from these other cultures and try to claim it as your own. You are not the basis for Western civilization, not by a long shot.
Once you do that, you can talk about the value of man, the rights of man, what is man put here to do. But if you don't believe any of that, if you just believe that man is sort of a random assemblage of atoms that happened along, because the universe is random and there are lots of iterations of it, then I find a hard time making the moral argument against, for example, things like slavery or abortion or tyranny or murder even. I mean, like...
Slavery, abortion, tyranny. What was Moses, if not tyranny? In the beginning of the book of Numbers, there's instructions for if you think your pregnant wife is cheating on you, to have her drink bitter water. And if she is, she will lose the baby. She will have a God-induced miscarriage. That baby will be aborted. And murder. How can you straight face say that you believe, you follow the Old Testament and say, oh, and we should be against murder? What, are you reading the children's version? Once again, God's moral lawgiver, Moses, slaughtering his own people, slaughtering others, women and children. There's killing and death, chapter after chapter. What version of this book are you reading?
Capital punishment on the flip side.
Capital punishment. I mean, if you are basically just an ant, unless you're a Janus and you believe all forms of life should equally be protected, but that's a religion too. If you believe like a secular version of that, then okay, I guess I buy it. But otherwise, you have to explain what makes human beings special and why is that specialness worthy of protection.
It seems that Ben Shapiro is completely ignorant of evolution and has never really thought about these things. How do you adapt for your environment? How do you survive? Well, obviously, thinking about problems and addressing them before they come would be great for survival. So rather than just living moment by moment, and when you get hungry, now you're looking for food. When you get attacked, now you're looking for shelter. Rather thinking, well, what if I want to eat a couple of hours from now? Maybe I can plan that. What if I get attacked? Well, I'll have shelters. I'll think about plans of action. And this is how intelligence involved, where we can start thinking about things and contemplating about things and having thoughts for better protection, better survival. And obviously, for protection, caring about yourself, definitely caring about children. I mean, what's a greater love than a mother's love for her children? And thinking about these things, caring about yourself, caring about your family, caring about your society, and caring about the world. Obviously, these things are beneficial for survival. To hear Ben talk about these things, it seems like he really does have a complete ignorance of evolution and where we came from and all these things that happened to got us to be where they are now. Unfortunately, it seems like everything he knows has come from this book of complete ignorance from 3,500 years ago.
Does lead to this, what it seems to me, disingenuous determinism. That seems to be the logical conclusion of that materialist thinking. But
And disingenuous is the right word, because I think that what ends up happening, it's very weird, is when you talk to a lot of people who are atheists. Like I read Sam Harris's books, and I've met Sam, and I think Sam's a smart guy. And when I read what Sam has to say, a lot of what he has to say is based on just an assumption of free will. There's an assumption that you can choose otherwise, that you are in control of your own life, and that you should live a moral life, that he has constructed for you his version of what morality looks like. Alan Dershowitz sort of has a similar model. And the problem is, where are you getting this free will stuff in a materialistic universe in which you're just a random assemblage of atoms? Like, where is this free will coming from? Where do you get that? And how do you square that with a materialist version of reality? I think that the best proof of God, I've always said this, I think the best proof of God to me is is sort of a Cartesian notion that you are a thinker, you are a being.
I can
that
acknowledge myself in
right,
the world.
you are a self, right? You're not just a random assemblage of stuff that wakes up new every morning, and that if you have a hamburger, you're a different person than you were 1 minute before because you just put some new stuff in your body, right?
We evolved to be thinking beings. Once again, hearing Ben Shapiro talk, it sounds like he has a complete ignorance of evolution. I wish he would pick up some books and do a lot of learning. It just seems like he has a lot of catching up to do. And at least, even if he disagrees with something, at least he can have an intelligent conversation about it, because he's bringing up these things like we have nothing else but his religious book as far as answers about how we got here and why we are thinking beings. As far as Sam Harris doesn't believe we have free will. He's in this determinism ideology, and more specifically, hard determinism. He believes our genetics, who our parents were, where we were born, so many factors that we had nothing to do with, that we were born into, and the fact that we are this chemicals and material, and then follow the same guiding principles where every action must have had some type of previous action. He believes every thought and every decision we've ever made was determined and couldn't have been anything different. Now, Sam Harris is an atheist, but he doesn't speak for all atheists. Certainly not all atheists think that way. That's not what I think. But it's not just an atheist issue. There is theological determinism, which I'm sure you're familiar with. God has his plan. He's all knowing. Everything is planned, in which case, every decision you make, everything you do, you can't do anything different. It is part of God's plan. So definitely, there is a theological determinism as well, and not all religious people follow it. But the ones who don't, they do have this seemingly things just not adding up. I mean, this has been brought up about the description of God. If God is all knowing and he knows what he's going to do at 12 o'clock noon tomorrow, then he doesn't have free will. It's already set. And that also puts limitations on him being all powerful as well. If God knows exactly what you're going to do tomorrow at 12 o'clock, you don't have free will. That path is already determined. So it's not just an atheist thing, and it's certainly not something that all atheists believe and all religious people believe. It's a pretty deep conversation. You can think of free will just as I have control of my actions and my thoughts. I'm not being forced to do this. I am doing this under control, understanding what I'm doing, understanding the consequences. That's kind of an easy way of looking at free will. That's the way our court system defines it. But if you really get into hard determinism and some of these other concepts as well, libertarian free will and soft determinism, compatibilism, and there's even indeterminism, and even quantum physics makes its way into this conversation. It gets into an extremely complex subject, which most people don't even want to bother getting into.
The notion that you are a coherent human being with the capacity to think and the capacity to control your behavior and the capacity to change, that's the basis of all of civilization. You take away that basic Augustinian notion of free will and it's all over.
That's basically saying if humans weren't human, then you can take away human civilization. I mean, it's kind of a pointless comment to make.
I couldn't agree more. So you've read all the books. You've read St. Augustine and Descartes and all these people. Most people haven't read all the books. If you're a young conservative, either you're on campus or you're in high school or something, you want to join the vast right-wing conspiracy, you want to get your card, I keep mine in my wallet all the time, what should you do? What should you, and I don't just mean what books you should read, obviously you should do that too, but what should the would-be young conservative be doing right now?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing you should do is work hard. I think working hard is basically the first notion in any conservative philosophy. If you are willing to work hard for your own betterment, then you're already moving in the right direction politically because you're an individual who feels you need to better yourself. You're not just a piece of garbage in a collection. So if you value yourself enough to work hard, then I think that you're going to move in a conservative direction sort of automatically.
Work hard, always have a book open and a book in progress, always commit yourself to a lifelong commitment to learning, always work on self-study and learn something about everything and everything about something.
I think that, in terms of reading, obviously you should read the same texts that were good enough for Lincoln. I mean, if you read the Bible and Shakespeare and follow that up with the Federalist Papers, I think you start with those three and you'll be in pretty good shape.
The Federalist Papers, Common Sense by Thomas Paine, the United States Constitution, Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights. Also read the Republic, the Apology, Analects from Confucius, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and The Prince by Machiavelli, and the list goes on and on and on. There's a whole bunch of reading you should do. Now, Shakespeare, to me, I'm not a big fan. I could take or leave that. The Bible, sure, read the Bible, but first take out everything that's either irrelevant, hateful, or insane, and then the 10 remaining pages you should be able to get through pretty quickly.
A root respect for Western civilization lies at the core of conservative philosophy, which is why there is something we want to conserve and something the left wants to tear down. So if you have a respect for these institutions of Western civilization and you say, yes, they were flawed, and yes, it's our goal to perfect them and make sure that the original aspirations are fulfilled generation over generation, improved over time, then we can make purer what we were given. But that's not quite the same thing as what the left is saying, which is that what we were given is garbage, and if we just discard that, we can build something brand new. I mean,
we definitely should not throw away what we have. That's insane, and I know the leftist that he's talking about, and I agree with him. These people are out of their mind. There's no way we should be throwing out the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights, certainly. And we have built on these things. When you look at all men are created equal. Well, that used to mean white men that own land, and now it applies to everyone. There's so much progress that we've made. When you look at religious freedom, it used to just apply to protecting Christian sects from other Christian sects, but now applies to people of all religions or no religion. So we've made a lot of progress, and we should continue this progress. But you cannot continue progress if your mind is bound to an ancient book of ignorance. What progress is there in the Bible? When are we going to get a new release, a new version comes out? It's never going to change. It will always be a static book of ignorance. The Bible has a story about how if a woman doesn't prove her virginity on her wedding night, she's to be stoned to death. And that story is not going away. That will always be there. This represents the ignorance of the past. In order to progress, we must leave the ignorance of the past behind and move on.
Just wait till I get my hands on it. I'm going to do great.
Yeah, exactly. The last couple centuries, as someone said to me on Sunday night, the last couple centuries have been very poor proof of the idea that secular humanism has a great record in remaking man in a positive direction. Like that argument would have swung a lot better in 1788, right?
Absolutely
Before
true.
the French Revolution, works a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
So that ends the video. So after talking about how much we should respect our country and the progress that has been made, now he's saying, oh, the last 2 centuries, just throw those out. That was secular humanism. And look at the terrible job they've done over the last 200 years. And things were just so much better before the French Revolution. Oh boy, if only it were if only we can go back to the good old days. Wow. This was not destroying atheism. Ben Shapiro is incapable, and he's young. You know what? I wish him well. I hope he's able to break this bubble. He definitely talks like somebody who's orthodox. That came through loud and clear. Hopefully he's able to break the chains and break out of this bubble and explore real history and real science and just understand the world so much better outside of this little tiny room that he's locked himself in. But anyway, we'll see what happens. Hope you enjoyed that. Until next time.
Cisco, do we have to leave all our good friends now?
Only until next time, Pancho. Adios, amigos.